Thank you to each of you for being here this afternoon. We are excited about having this conversation. I think it's a very important conversation. So just as background, there have been a lot of questions from existing coaches around peaceful parenting and what this means for people of color. And um, we really want to have this conversation around making sure that this way of parenting is safe for our families. That's a lot of the concerns that we hear from coaches, from parents that are, kind of investigating whether or not this is for them. And so we'd like to just open the space to share your experiences as coaches, as parents, as grandparents, around this topic. And so we will just start with some brief introductions. And let's start with you, Richard. Can you just tell us a bit about yourself, how you came to this space? And yeah,
Sure.
go ahead.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to be here, and thanks for allowing me to be a part of it. And yeah, so I'm Richard Dixon, and my wife and I are raising our four grandchildren. I have 8 and 6 year old granddaughters and 3 year old twin boys. And um, I came into this situation a little over a year ago, right at the height of COVID, and my background as far as parenting is concerned over the past 6 years has been in the space of TBRI, which is trust-based relational intervention, out
Mhm,
of TCU with Dr. Karen Purvis. And I had been seeking to get into her train the trainer sessions, which have been really hard to get into because there's so in such demand. And so when COVID hit, those classes, she shut down her sessions. And I was just happened to be searching one day and came across Jai. And I thought, wow, this seems really close to what I believe in, what I've been wanting. And I reached out and took that journey. And what Jai did was provide me the structure for what I had been believed and practiced. It gave me the structure for what I wanted to do because I had already been on the path of building my own parenting online course. And so it was kind of the missing piece that I needed to help me move forward in a very confident manner as to complete this journey, at least this part of the journey. And so it's been a great experience for me, just going through the JI training. It's been awesome to implement these practices within our household, and to have my girls, benefit from my own transformation and to see their transformation taking place. It's really been a beautiful process, and it's a process. I
mhm.
haven't arrived, still got a long way to go, but I'm enjoying the journey, and that's what I really love about this whole experience.
We are happy to have you here, and we are
Yes.
definitely looking forward to hearing, more about your experience and your examples as we, discuss this topic. So let's move on to you, Niurka. Um, Welcome.
I'm Niurka Maldonado. I'm the founder of Connected Kindred, and I've been a coach now for a little over a year. I'm a homeschooling mom based in New York City. I have two daughters who are 8 and 5. And what brought me to this work and what brought me to this lifestyle that we now have is just a desire to do something different with my kids than the way I was parented.
Mhm.
And for me, I needed definitions and I needed actual practices to implore because until I got here, I just had a bucket list of things that I didn't want to do. And
Yes.
so I wanted to reach my kids, connect with my kids, help guide my kids, and create boundaries in a way that was very different from what I knew before. And Jai has brought that for me.
Awesome. I love that point of, having the desire, but also needing to know how, right? Like, what does this actually look like? What do I need to do versus just thinking about what I don't want to do, right? So I love that. I love that. Being action oriented and future focused. Silencia, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and very, very interesting to be here. I have a point of view that is of transparency, really, as a parent. October 2019, my oldest son, I was in DC, and he said, I'd like to talk to you. And I was like, okay. So he came to my hotel room, and my life changed forever. Forever. I was devastated. He had been going to therapy. He had been going to a psychologist, I think. And the questions he had down for me on paper, it wasn't, that the questions were so harsh, but it was more so his attitude. I didn't know what kind of therapist he was going to see because of the attitude he had. It was a very negative attitude. And then I realized later he was hurting. It was a lot of hurt, but I'm like, where is all of this coming from? So I lamented for months, and December 2019, all of my children were home for Christmas, and it was a Christmas I will never, ever forget. My other son was going to therapy, and it just kind of blew up. It kind of blew up that Christmas. And I'm telling you, I was almost just, I didn't even want to kind of go on, to be honest with you. I mean, you raised 5 beautiful, healthy, talented, amazing children. Everybody is talking about how your family is a role model family. My husband and I, doing the best we could with the best we knew how, all those things. And it was just devastating. So I prayed a lot, and my husband and I really worked through this. He helped me through because the issue was really me, not so much him. Although I believe it's more him than they think it is, and I'm only saying that because my husband is just a sweetheart. He's a forgiving, kind, loving person. And I'm the more, extroverted, disciplining parent. So I kind of get I'm kind of like the villain. I always said, I really just prayed and asked for a place. I needed a place to go where I could release some of this. And I prayed for a group of women, and not just Black women. I wanted mostly white women, to be honest with you, because I wanted to be around a different group of people. I really needed Ja. And when I found Ja, I was so excited. In the first 2 weeks, I cried. All the women did in the first 2 weeks. And it was exactly what I needed. I'm already a facilitator. I've done many workshops for women. I've done many workshops in marriage. We have our own marriage support group. I've done, all types of workshops for children. But this I needed, and I needed for me, and I needed to be able to help and lead and guide and direct people who have young children and who have older children. And the difference between October 2019 and this day right here is amazing. I mean, I get choked up just thinking about it. It's amazing because I started the work, and I'm still working, but I've come a long way, and I'm very thankful to be here.
So first of all, I just want to tell you, thank you so much for just your transparency. I mean, you kicked it off with the right word, just your transparency and your vulnerability. And I think you're coming at this from a space that, you've raised, several of your children, and you've still got children at home, and you are at a space where you realize it's not over. Right? Like we have an opportunity to learn and to evolve and to grow. And the fact that you took whatever feedback that was that, that your children provided to you, you didn't just sit with it. You didn't just say, well, we did the best we could with what we had, right? You didn't just stop there. You said, you know what? Let me sit with this and figure out what I can do. right? What is it that I can do to help contribute to the growth and the healing? And for that, that is a huge congratulations. So
Thank
thank you
you.
for being here and sharing that with us. And I think that you sharing that testimony will be so helpful to so many people on their journey.
I hope so. I really do. I really do. Because it's all for nothing if it's not. If I can't help somebody through my testimony and through my journey, what is it for?
Yes.
Yes.
And I would also think that the topic that we're talking about today, like parenting, from fear or parenting because of the fears that we have,
Yes.
probably relates to
Oh my goodness.
why you chose to parent that way. So I'm very interested in like hearing your perspectives
Oh yes.
as we go forward.
Yes.
So awesome. So
Thank you.
last but not least, Ray Stampley, how about you introduce yourself?
All right. I am Ray Stampley, co-host of the Us Them We podcast with my wife, Crystal, who's the moderator here. Um, I came in this space, honestly, when we were pregnant with our firstborn, and we were just discussing how we were going to parent. And that really just kind of opened up the conversation because of our dynamic. I've always wanted kids. I loved how I grew up. And I felt like I had that blueprint down. I didn't really have to really think about how we were going to do it. But when we started broaching certain topics, I realized that there were certain things I didn't want to do anymore. And I wasn't really sure about where to go next. And so that really brought up some feelings within me about how I was raised, and then not knowing what the next step was going to be going forward. So I kind of it's funny, every story that was told here today, I resonated with in some way, shape, or form. So that's what brought us here. And then that's what brought us. Actually, my wife, Crystal, she got to Jive first. And once she took it and the pandemic hit, I'm a personal trainer by trade. And once that hit, she's like, babe, you know what? You probably should take it as well. She's like, I have some information, but I actually want you to go through the process as well. And it's been very helpful to give a structure as to how to do it, but then also to the application for myself. It also helped with some healing. Going through the process, I told them I had to stop a few times. It could be because it just got too overwhelming. It was starting to open up things that I hadn't yet gone through or hadn't dealt with myself. So there were probably 3 or 4 weeks that I didn't get all the way through the lesson when it was time to do the Zoom call, and I was like, guys, it was just too much. It was too much. So through that process, we got here, and we really just started being intentional about what we were doing, and then becoming confident why we decided to do it that way. And so now here we are.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And just as a quick introduction for myself, I think, Ray, you kind of covered a good bit of that. So thank you. So I'm Crystal Stampley. I am also a JI, certified coach. We do have the podcast. I am a mother of 3 children. They are 8, 6, and 4. And they are our why, right? They are truly my why for conscious parenting and parenting in this way. So I think it would be great for us to go ahead and dive into the discussion. Okay, so our first question, and I'm actually gonna send this to you, Niurka. So I'd like to add some clarity around what it means for our children to not be safe, or like, what is it when we say that, peaceful parenting might not make our children safe, or we feel like maybe this isn't a safe way of parenting for them? Like, how would you answer that? How do you look at that question?
2 components come up for me. The first is actual physical safety. How will they behave out in the world if they do feel that confidence and freedom to just show up as themselves? And how will that register to other people who might see them as a threat or inherently bad without their awareness? And then the other part about what it means to not be safe is Will they be emotionally prepared for some of the things that they're going to face that they may not read about in books, see on television, or have in common with other kids their same age? Um, you don't want your kid to be shocked in the world when they first come across their experience of any kind of racism or other microaggressions that they may not even be fully aware of at the time. It just kind of leaves them with a residual negative feeling. Um, so you want to protect them emotionally and provide them with the armor that they need to get through their days in school or when they're out with other people or even other family members. And then you also want them to be aware of how their actions may be perceived by others while still somehow finding a way to preserve their self-esteem and their sense of self-worth and not to internalize some of the messages that they might be getting. Um,
I love
so that's what came up for me.
Yeah. So would you happen to have like I love where you're going here. Would you happen to have like an example of how you might prepare your children to exist in a space where they may be different from others and may experience um, things that may make them feel uncomfortable? Do you have
Yeah.
any examples of that?
One example I can think of is when my eldest daughter, who is 8.5, went to sleepaway camp for the first time, and it was down south in a primarily white camp, and so she was the only girl in her cabin with kinky curly hair, and she was only given like 15 minutes in the morning to do her hair, and that's very tricky with our texture. And she did experience two or three of the girls every morning sitting on her trunk, laughing at her, poking fun, finding it her whole process of caring for her hair ridiculous, and they wouldn't let it go. And I knew something like that would happen when she was sleeping away from home and not around people who looked like her. I knew that people would find it strange or ask questions and they might tease her. I fully anticipated that. And so we had that discussion of what she could say and also understanding why it's so strange to them, because of course she's only ever known being in a roof with other women with hair textures that look like her. You know, any other kind of time that she had with other kids, it was not a sleepaway situation. And so we discussed it ahead of time. And I gave them the other perspective of that it was going to be strange for them and that they were not going to understand it. So that when she faced it, it didn't sting quite as much. You know, of course, they were friends and she was feeling vulnerable and she was homesick. So all of that was not fun. But at least it didn't come out of left field. And when it happened and we spoke about it after, it wasn't that big of a deal to her ultimately. It was kind of like, guess what happened? And she knew why. And it was more like her almost looking at them like they just don't get it versus what's wrong with my hair.
Yes, I love that. So like what I'm pulling from that is kind of the preparation from your standpoint as a parent, right? Like being proactive and anticipating what might happen in those situations. Because to be honest, right, many of us know what's going to happen in those types of situations because we've lived them, we've experienced them, right? But instead of coming at it from a negative perspective, you armored her, you prepared her to be able to go into that situation with a sense of confidence, right? With tools and words. And so I love that. And for her to come back and be able to say, exactly like you said, guess what happened versus, mommy, guess what happened, right? Like you empowered her. I love that.
Yes, and it went beyond just giving her affirmations and making her feel good and building her up. There was also like, this thing might come at you. I want you to know it. I want you to recognize it. I think that's also very important.
Yes. And calling a thing, right? Not shying away from the conversations. I think a lot of us as, people of color, we recognize that these things are going to happen,
Right.
right? And actually just addressing them and not sweeping them under the rug, or, you know, like it is what's going to happen. I think that's the difference between, you know, white children that may be able to live life without thinking about these things, and us, like as we're raising our children. So that's why it's important for, you know, even white families to have these conversations, right? Because if our children are old enough to learn about racism, right, then white children should also be old enough to learn about it and how to be anti-racist.
So Chris, I think that's great. Chris, can I add one other thing to that as well?
Yes.
Being that I have a adult daughter, she's 28 now, but she experienced this, of course, 20 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what we learned, in addition to what you've already shared, Niurka, is just that we would also, if we knew who the camp counselor was going to be, we would have a discussion with the camp counselor to help them be prepared as well, because it was not only just her getting up in the mornings, but it was also when they go to the swimming pools, you know, how to be prepared for that. So we learned through the process, my wife and I did. And so and what all we needed to prepare her for, not just the conversations, but logistically, you know, having a swim cap. And we would talk through all those kind of scenarios, because those were real anxieties for our daughter. I mean, and so we would look at all the scenarios and try to talk through and prepare and try to set up ahead of time what she needed to have down there to feel secure, to feel safe, to feel good in her own skin about what she's going to be doing, and that she wasn't going to be limited to from the other activities because, you know, her hair got wet, or, you know, those are the kinds of things that were very helpful for her to have a great camp experience. And so anyway, I just wanted to add that to what you've already shared.
No, thank you for that. Thank you for that. And so when we think about like this preparation for our children, how does that relate to peaceful parenting or conscious parenting? Like how do those the tools that we're looking to provide to our children to be able to exist and be, you know, empowered in those types of situations, how does that relate to the way that you choose to parent?
Before you go that, can I answer the clarity question?
Yeah.
So I was just thinking about more about it. They said, what is the fear? And I believe the fear is the perceived differences. So if we use the same example from camp, especially with kids, if you have something that's different, but it's perceived to be better, if you have a pair of shoes that are perceived to be better than someone else, no one has a problem with that. They're looking to see what you have. But if the perceived difference seems to be negative, that's when the problem comes in. So the hair products and the timing that it takes is perceived to be worse or different, and that's when people have the problem. So highlighting that and helping people understanding that differences aren't bad, and that's where the education for our kids as we're raising them is important. And we're kind of going through a dual learning situation, because we're teaching them how we're doing it in our house, but we also have to teach them that a lot of people at this point, it's not the norm. So you doing it this way, you may not receive that. You may not receive that same level of empathy outside of the house. You may not receive that same level of care and understanding outside of the house, and how to prepare for that. So while our kids may extend that to other kids, it may not get extended to them. And they have to know that you have to be prepared for that as well, and to give them grace, because there is a grace period for someone learning something new, and how you should approach that. But then also create your boundaries around that. Just because we are giving them the space to do it does not mean that we allow ourselves to be trampled upon. We can create the distance and space to allow them to learn, but also create the boundaries for you to stay safe for yourself as well.
That is a great point. Thank you for adding that. Yeah. Anyone else want to add anything to the clarity piece before we move on? No? Okay. So I do want to go to the question around like, how do we prepare our children? Like, what does this mean in the context of peaceful parenting? So how you show up as a parent, how does that impact the way that you parent?
May I speak on that
Yeah,
one?
sure thing.
Okay, great. The first thing that comes to mind from that question is the difference between the Morris generation and the Stampless generation. And I think that's very important to point out, because your generation, and I'm assuming you're under 40.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm over 50. So your generation and my generation are seeing this in different ways, the parenting piece in different ways, of course. But first of all, and I'm not patronizing you at all, because I think it's amazing that your generation is honorably doing what our generation should have done and could not have done years and years ago. If we had, I probably wouldn't be sitting having this conversation with you right now. What you're doing is awesome. So I'm thinking of a certain cliche kind of that I heard, is sweeping things under the rug. I feel like, I'm going to just speak for me, not my whole generation, but you can take that any way you want. That sweeping things under the rug was probably one of the most popular things that I did as a parent. I remember one situation where my son, for his 11th grade prom, he actually took a Caucasian girl to the prom. And we were fine with that. You know, we had no problem. In fact, we wanted to make sure our children had exposure with all, you know, all types of people from all different places. So that wasn't a problem for my husband and I. But it probably was a problem for her father, not her mother, because her mother was really excited, and her mother even bought her this expensive dress, and my son was just so excited. And in the back of my mind, I'm crying with tears behind my eyeballs, because he's so excited. And he was, in the same hand, on the other hand, the father was one of his teachers. And he was telling me some things about the way this particular teacher was like acting towards him or responding towards him. And it wasn't anything, you know, unusual. I'm figuring this teacher just had one of those kind of teacher superior attitudes, you know, so it wasn't a really big deal. But when my son said, I'm going to the prom with his daughter, then I heard a loud boom. Okay. So he was so excited. It didn't go over my head, but I totally ignored the fact that we probably should have sat down and had a talk about what was really going on. I was so busy trying to make sure he felt good about the whole thing. Like, I came downstairs to go to her house with him and my husband. When we went to the house, her house, the young lady's house, found out that the father wasn't going to be there. He wasn't there. In fact, he was there, but he got in the car and drove off without speaking, and did not stay for the picture taking or anything. My heart sank. It sank. And my son, he's still innocent. He's 16, and he's like, oh, he just had someplace to go. You know, he's kind of brushing it off. So I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Because it wasn't resonating with him in the same way. And so when we took them home after the prom, she jumped out of the car so my son would not walk her to the door. And he wanted to walk her to the door, and she said no. And at that point, I realized why.
Mhm.
You know, I realized why. I shoved it under the rug only because that was a situation where I didn't feel like it was resonating with him the way it was with me. And I wanted to protect him. I didn't want I didn't want him to take what was a good night for him or fun for him or whatever and turn it into this big racial, thing. But I just feel like too often shoving things under the rug. And if I had to teach a class or talk to some 40-year-old parents or 30-year-old parents or 20, however old year parents, I would talk about doing just that, making sure we find ways to teachable moments and we don't always wait for the experience to happen.
Right.
That is so important. So important. So this is very serious work. And I just wanted to just add that to the question. I hope that helped in some way.
No, I think, oh, go ahead, Niurka, you were going to say something.
I was saying and listening to Selentia's story, I'm struck by the connection between what we're trying to accomplish with peaceful parenting and how that ties into kids of color. And I think the important bridge there is this awareness, this acknowledgement. And, your boy is 16 years old. He has this idea of like what his prom should be like. And he got to do some of that with the pictures, but then other things that he maybe fantasized about, like walking his date to the door and all of that, he couldn't do. And to whatever extent he didn't mind that and he let it go and he didn't notice, it's a beautiful thing because, he's hung on to his innocence, and yet the residue of that is still on you because
Yes.
you couldn't not see that. We just have too many years on this planet. We know what we know,
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that it's important for coaches when they're working with parents and these kinds of stories to come up to let the awareness be there. You cannot treat instances of racism, however large or small, whether someone was hurt or not, you can't treat them like they're just figments of the person's imagination.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, we know what we know. And as coaches, whether or not you've experienced this directly, when you have a client who is sharing a story like that with you, let it rise up. Understanding that some people might experience this story and there'll be a 16-year-old boy who doesn't know, and then the other would be his mom who's like fully aware of it and has to like carry that for the both of them. And I think the heaviness of it, the weight of it, the pain of it, so much of it gets lifted when you just reaffirm for your client, that's terrible. That is awful.
Yes.
That really happened, versus well, maybe that, but why do you think, why does your mind go there?
Or the what aboutisms, right? Like, what about, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I think like it's okay to let it sit and for the awareness to be there, because the moment that you try to shut down the client in this instance, like as an example, that's when they're like, peaceful parenting is not for me, because clearly these people don't know.
No, I had a question for Selentia.
Yes, sir.
How would you have handled, with your mindset now, how would you have handled that after she got out the car going forward? At what point would you have addressed it with your son, and what would you have said?
I think probably giving it a few days, just so he could kind of like have his moments, because I feel like growing up as I tend to do some things that were handled the way my mom, she was a single parent mother, and I don't use that as an excuse for her, but there's a lot of stuff. She was just, and I've learned to have great sympathy for her, as I got older. But I think what I would probably do is give him some time, some days to kind of live in, the enjoyment of the prom, and just ask him some questions and ask him to ask me some questions about how he felt about the father not being there, just being direct. Was that okay? And even if they were to say something like, even if he was to say something like, "Oh, Mom, we don't need to talk about that," or "It's no big deal," because that's really popular line. It's no big deal. But just the fact that, if I would have been less sweeping things under the rug by just saying, I want to know how that made you feel, or her not being able to, did you feel like you missed out, not being able to walk her to the door, or how did she respond to you when she saw you the next day, at school, things like that, just to give him a chance to get it out if he wanted to get it out, giving him more space in everything, giving my children more space to be express themselves. Of course, I'm really working at, it's a little harder with my 18-year-old because she has her older siblings kind of talking to her about what didn't happen for them a little bit. But with my 14-year-old son, it's getting better with giving him. My daughter, definitely haven't given up on my 18-year-old daughter, because she knows I'm right there in front of her, for her, with her, every step of the way, anything she needs or wants to talk about. It's just about not forcing her and her comfort level. So all these things I'm telling you now, Mr. Stampley, is really about, things that before 2019, I probably wouldn't have done, to be honest with you, to that extent. I don't consider myself a person that, because if I feel like if I talk to other youth and mentor other youth, and they tell me some things that I don't even think they tell their own parents, that surely my children should be able to come to me.
Yeah.
And
that's an important part, right? Like when we think about the differences between like traditional parenting and conscious parenting, or peaceful parenting, but then also peaceful parenting in Black, Indigenous, people of color, like communities, like for me, a lot of that is around like communication and around like creating space for our children to have conversations with us and to feel open to talking to us about the little things, but then also the big things. And how do we respond? How do we engage them when they do talk to us? Right. When they're saying something that doesn't necessarily sit right in our soul. How do we respond to that? Right.
Yes. Like, and that's what my 27-year-old came to me with, basically in October of 2019. Why didn't you let us do this? And why didn't you, in Christmas time, and you didn't listen to us? And just some things I just felt were absurd, because I'm thinking, why didn't you sit down and talk to us before you started a business? I'm like, what? But he's on a whole nother level of thinking anyway.
Yeah, but even the thoughts of that is like, it's around, our children having choice and agency, in their own lives. And then also in the lives of those around them, right? So like us starting businesses or us doing things, they do affect the family, right? So it's not that we are asking for an okay, or like, can I do this? Or, is it okay, as your parent, if I do X, Y, and Z? It's not that, right?
I understand that now.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. But for those that might be listening that are still kind of in that thought of, I don't know about how I feel about children being, able to speak up about certain things, or to, provide like their,
input,
like their thoughts or their input.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Well, he and his wife, he got married on Zoom last August, and he and his wife met in college, and they're in their late 20s. So, and I see them, like, as I kind of see you and your husband, I could probably tell you some of the things you will and won't do. Even from talking to them, and they're really big on breaking generational curses. And but one thing I would love to remind them of, and I'm glad getting ready to put this in the record, so to speak, is that their parents broke generational curses also.
Yeah.
Yes, and because they were mentioning that a lot during their marriage vows, breaking generational curses, and I'm just so thankful that they made choices and decided how they want to raise their children, when that is something that we just did not even really sit down and talk a lot about. You know, they don't even know how much I'm excited about that. It really does excite me to know that they will sit down and talk about whether they're going to spank or whether they're not going to spank, which they have already told us that they're not going to spank. You know, so
I think that's a great point, is that
yes.
as we, these different generations like coming forward, like we are standing on the shoulders of our ancestors, right? Like we are literally, because we're choosing to do something different. That's not a slight on past generations.
No.
We want our children to do better and to learn more and to grow, right?
I just think, to be honest with you though, I'm going to say this one thing. I really believe that it is important for your generation to make sure that it is not a slight on other generations, to be intentional to us, to make sure, because really, I think there are many parents out there like my husband and ourselves, myself, if we had exposure to different things, we would have done some things differently, and so now, we had to go through this. It's almost like a grieving process we had to go through. It really was like a grieving process. And to get to the point where your children feel like, oh, you did this because you didn't care or you didn't love them, which is absolutely crazy. You can tell when I talk about my children, they're just like the best. My husband and my children are the best thing that ever happened to me. That's why I was like, God, you got to help me. We got to fix this. We're talking about generations here. We're talking about generations. And I'm talking about being well with my own soul. That I, in moving forward. So that's it. I'm sorry. I get a little carried away.
I'll tell you as well, like your story resonates with me so much. Like you sound like my mom in the stories that I've gone through with her. Right. And this has been a process. And I even had to tell her in the beginning, I was hurt and I was saying things that I didn't know, but I had to continue to search through myself first and then understand that, yes, Mom, we're the information age and we have a little bit more information. Well, actually, we have a lot more information than you do.
A lot.
We have a lot more, and that's okay. So there was a period where I had to forgive how I felt about her, and it wasn't necessarily her fault, because the empathy at that point, once I started to heal, the empathy was allowing to set in, and I was able to see, you know what? I do remember her saying, we did this when my parents didn't do this. We did this. Yes. And so I had to look at it and say, okay, she did the best that they did, the best they could. They parented out of love, even though some of the actions, but that came from a lack of knowledge, not from a lack of love.
Oh, definitely. Especially, when a person is like has gone through some things and they're really just, you talk about spankings, and that's something I really, really want to address in the Black community, because I feel like a lot we spank out of anger, not just because I am a spank, so I'm a spank, like it's anger. Like it's just pure anger. And instead of taking a moment, so go ahead. I don't want to mess up your time.
That is so everything, but it's such a process. And the word I use is journey. Like it is a journey, and we learn to enjoy the process of the journey instead of looking for the end destination. Because at the end of the day, it never really ends.
Never.
The journey never ends.
Until it's over.
Until it's over. Exactly. When it's over, then it ends. But you continue to learn because on top of that, the evolution process as the years go on, it's going to change in the next 5 to 10 years. And everything that we're talking about that is not as normal, my prayer and hope that it becomes more normal this
Yes.
conversation versus the conversations of the past generation.
Absolutely, absolutely. My son said to me one time, my second son, he kept saying to me, "You'll never change. You'll never change. You'll just never, ever change." And I used to be so upset when he said that, because my belief is all about redemption. It's all about change, and of course he didn't realize, but you know what? I'm so happy he said that to me, because it even pushed me harder, to understand more, to try to really try to comprehend, what's he thinking, what's he going through. And we all still have a long way to go, but we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there.
It's like
It's
Crystal,
important too, I think, to keep in mind that at the end of the day, even when before you had the resources and a new perspective and a new way of looking at it, and you did the training, your son still felt strong enough and comfortable enough with you to have that very difficult conversation. Because there are literally millions of people in the world throughout history that needed to have that conversation and could not. Like, that was not going to be okay. That was not going to fly. And for him to have that conversation with you suggests to me that while there may be some things that you regret, there was a part of you that existed on a deeper level that has always existed, that knew better and encouraged better in them. And I think that's an important concept to explore, is that I don't necessarily believe that a lot of these things that we're doing are brand spanking new to us or to our people. I think a lot of it, if you go back enough generations, was a return. We're returning to something. We're not, we are breaking generational patterns, but we're also coming home in a lot of ways, because there's a history here of trauma and interruption. And we also existed before that. And so some of that lived on before you did die, clearly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Like
you're absolutely right, and Niurka, and you're true in what you're saying as far as trauma, how it interrupted generations, and I think we are coming back to some things that were there before. I listen to what's being shared, and I'm just in awe. I love the discussion. I can relate to all of that. However, I'm on a little bit of a different bent as far as how I feel about what you've asked, in that, we're all parent coaches, certified parent coaches. And I'm thinking in terms of the people that I interact with, will be interacting with, whether it be single parent households, caregivers of foster children, adoptive parents. That's the arena that I live in. And to get them on this journey, Ray, you talked about the journey, to get them on this journey of conscious parenting, intentional parenting, I believe is from my perspective, is going to be a hard sell, because of the many challenges, levels of challenges that they face day in, day out. And the one thing that keeps coming to mind here for me is, how do I mean to throw another question out there, but that's just to myself. How do I help them see the value of intentional conscious parenting? Because I came here because I saw my need, right? There are, I was in a desperate situation and was looking. Most people that I will come in contact with, they're not going to be in where I'm coming from, but they still need what I know and what I've been through, right? And so that's where I find myself as I think about the beauty of what we've learned and what we've experienced in this journey that we're on, of getting them to buy in, getting them to join in on this journey, this evolution, this revolution of conscious parenting, which I think is so beautiful and so needed. And so that's what's passionate for me, is my children are the why that keeps driving me, and what I want for them and what I want for the great grandchildren, and on and on and on in generations to come. And helping the people that I interact with, I'll be coaching and to help them to see this why behind it, because they're exhausted from working 9 hours a day and they don't feel like they have the time to be engaged, to be intentional, to listen, to have time to have their 8-year-old give them express their thoughts about how they felt about what they asked, what they were asked to do. Why they don't want to do something, or
Right.
to comfort them and draw close to them, as my 8-year was having a meltdown the other night and said, I hate you, and to draw close to her, not push her away. Having the energy to do that is where I see my challenges being. I'm talking about myself. That's where I see the real cost being, is because I work a 410, and so I'm exhausted, and I do the cooking, most of the cooking here, and so to come home and have to invest in time and have the twins on each leg pulling at me, have my girls need attention. That's where I've really found the challenges of helping my clients to buy into the conscious, intentional parenting. So that's where I'm at.
So I would want to ask you, so you mentioned the cost is like your time, right? Like
Yes.
whether or not like your time and your bandwidth. Yes.
Time and the energy, the time and the physical, mental bandwidth.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So then on the flip side of that, like what would be the cost that you would experience with like traditional parenting? So like while you may get your child to, be quiet or not talk to you or whatever at the drop of the dime, what is the cost that you would see on that end?
On the
and is
end,
that cost worth it?
on the wrong end, you're saying, or the right end?
On the non-conscious, non-peaceful parenting end.
Well, as a former power over parent, I want the behavior to stop so I can have at least a few minutes of what I call peace, right? And so it's all about what can I change right now, peace at what I call it at all costs,
Right.
whatever that required. Being on the other side is, I know the investment is worth me losing sleep over, because at the end of the day, to hear my 8-year-old say I love you and I'll see you in the morning, that's priceless, right? And that's what I think the message we have to help our clients get to, is to understand that, because in their minds they desire that and want that, but they're frustrated because they don't know how to close that gap.
Right.
And therefore we have to help them understand how to close that gap.
Yeah.
And
so the benefit that you're getting with this way of parenting, while there is an investment of time and energy, is the relationship between you and your children. Yes,
the relationship, the bond. That's what we are wanting to have with our children. And that's what our clients are wanting to have with their children. They're frustrated and at their wits' end because they don't have that understanding. They've not gone on this journey, as Ray mentioned. They've not gone through this transformation. And so it's hard for them to make that leap to what you're saying, to buy into conscious parenting, intentional parenting. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, so let's dive into that. Yep.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think especially when we're under stress, we get so caught up in where we are and not where we want to end up.
Mm-hmm.
And this happens to me if I'm arguing with my husband. I have a long list of things that I have done. I have cleaned this, I have done this laundry, I've done,
right.
It's where I am now.
Right now.
And it's completely separate for the vision that I want for my marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most powerful things that I've done with my clients is I have them visualize what their relationship with their child will look like. Not now, not when they're 2 or 3 or in the teenage years, but when everybody is full grown and evolved and in an actual moment. And for me, and I did this during my Jai training as well, I pictured a day on the beach with both of my girls, full grown, wanting to be there, not me dragging them or guilt coming, but them inviting me along and holding hands and giggling and talking about who's dating who. That closeness, that warmth, the fun, the lightheartedness. And I think whenever I get really, really frustrated, like that visualization helps me to realize, okay, if I just take this moment in where, one child is screaming at me or really livid with me or going through a hard time, if I just keep that end goal in mind, then this is not as important. And when you're under stress, you don't have the luxury of imagining sometimes. And so it's really important, I think, for everyone to allow themselves a few minutes to go there in their mind to see it. And also to remind people about how their relationship is with their own, caregiver or parent. And if that's something that they would like. I think that helps to put things in perspective.
Yes, I appreciate that. And I get full talking about this, like thinking about the fact that, we only have our kids in our homes for a certain period of time, right? It is a fraction of the time when you think about, like a traditional lifetime. So can I sacrifice a little bit for these, 18 years or what have you, right? Can I sacrifice a little bit for the future of our relationship? And I think that visualization is just so important. So thank you for that.
It is very important. Mine grew up so fast. I'm like, where did the time go? I mean, they're just growing up so fast. Of course, I can't wait to be an empty nester. But anyway,
Well, that won't happen for me.
I know, bless your heart. I wish I was in the same state with you. If you needed a babysitter, I would definitely be there for you because I know the feeling. But yeah, just being aware of what you said, Miss Stampley, about just being aware that they are, they're only little or young or in your care for a short time. And it's so important to make sure people are reminded of those subtleties, those things. It's very important. And sometimes just doing that can put a person into a space where they understand and realize, I need to slow down and really take a look at this.
Yeah. And when we parallel that with like our, entrepreneurial desires or our businesses or whatever, like we're willing to, stay up late hours and, put in that time or whatever. But, when we think about our families, like they're important, like they're our number one priority. Right. So
Right.
I think this has been a very engaging, and I mean, my heart is just so full, just being in community with you all and having this discussion. I think we can just wrap this up by, I just want to ask one last question. So what is it that makes you so passionate about this work? And yeah, I think that what is it that makes you so passionate about this work?
I guess I'll start first. To see not only our kids do it a certain way, but hopefully that this can be like the rock in the pond where it continues to ripple, and they are a part of that. Like we're a part of it, and they're also a part of it because they're going to be talking to their generation, and hopefully they can be that leader just by example. Like whether they're vocal about it or not, just by example, their actions. Someone can say, I saw those Stampley kids and they responded and they did this way. Whether they become vocal leaders in the space, that is up to their own personality, whether they take it on or not. But just by their actions, because of how we parent it, is what makes me passionate about continuing this on.
And contributing to world change, right? Because you imagine a world of consciously parented people.
That's the
Imagine
goal.
what that would look like.
That's the goal.
Right? So.
I would echo that sentiment too. For me, it's all about uplifting my own life, my children's life, also taking my family with me because I have noticed as they've seen me do things differently, there's always this moment of that's really weird and why would you do that? Or moments when it doesn't seem to be working. When my kids were younger, there was like, a lot of finger wagging. And then what always happens, and this is true of anybody who does this work, is people start to notice, and people start to ask questions and get curious, and it has an effect on the entire extended family and hopefully the entire extended community. And I'm also like really determined to end certain things with me, you know, specifically in part of my culture, we're Caribbean, things like kneeling on rice for punishment, or no one speaking about someone in the family who's a known pedophile, and just allowing that person to still carry on in society as they do. There's certain things that I'm so passionate about stopping with me that my children will never have to face. It won't even cross their minds that another existence would happen. Like, that motivates me to no end.
I love that. I love that. Yes.
My passion and what motivates me is really like what the airplane thing. Save yourself first. You know, save yourself first. Put that over your face first, and then you can save and help someone else. So that really drives me in that I'm going into new chapters of my life, and I'm still able to learn and to grow so that I may do what I'm called to do, and that is to serve others in any way that I'm called to do it. And this will just have a ripple effect on my children, generations to come, as you said, Mr. Stampley, and everything else that I can affect in a positive way.
I just think in addition to what everyone else has already said is that I'm really passionate about helping parents and caregivers transform their behaviors so that they can help their children who've experienced trauma have transformed behaviors and create peaceful households. And I love the work. I don't know if you guys got a chance to see the documentary on the wisdom of trauma. I'm all about how we can humanize trauma and really make it something that we can grow and learn from and embrace, and so that they can navigate this journey that they're on. So anyhow, I'm passionate about it. I'm really excited about my online course I'm doing a free webinar coming out in a few weeks. So it's going to be all about this whole thing we're talking about. So I'm excited about what's happening and moving forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for your time, for this engaging conversation. I'm just excited to see more people like us in this space and sharing this message far and wide, because we're out there. We are out there, right? Like we are out there. So I just appreciate everyone's time, and to Jai for creating this space for us to share and to empower other coaches like us. So
well, thank you, Crystal.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you all so much.
Thank you all. It's great meeting you all.
Appreciate it. Appreciate your
Great meeting you.
Yes.
Yes.